The Boeing Company. Love them, hate them, maybe you're an Airbus fan, I don't know what Airbus fans' opinions on Boeing are, but you can't deny that over the years, Boeing made so many well-used and even well-liked things. The 707, the 747, the pencil plane, KC-46s, the 717, the 787 Dreamliner, light rail vehicles for Boston and San Fran. Wait, what? To understand how that happened, let's first go back to the 1970s. By the early 1970s, the government was trying to keep its defense contractors occupied as by this time the Vietnam War was winding down. Around this time, Boeing Vertol, not Boeing themselves, had actually developed some non-aviation products, mainly the Morgantown Personal Rapid Transit and the CTA 2400 series cars for the CTA. Meanwhile, the MBTA in Boston and the Muni in San Francisco were trying to replace their aging PCC cars. In 1971, the Muni had issued a request for proposals for a new type of car, of which they'd purchased 78 of, to replace their PCC cars. Muni wanted a type of car that was, quote, specifically designed for San Francisco, adaptable to both subway and surface conditions, and seating more passengers than the present PCC streetcars. As for the MBTA, they initially tried to create a Type 6 car made out of wood. They did create a mock-up of one end, but as it turns out, unlike steam locomotives, it's more difficult to build a streetcar type from scratch by yourself when you are a train operator rather than a train maker. After that, the MBTA then wanted to purchase a car type that was being used on the Hanover Stadtbahn, built by Duwag. Unfortunately, that didn't happen because Buy America regulations stated that the UMTA, the predecessor to the FTA, could not fund grants for transit equipment built outside the US unless an exception was made by the Secretary of Transportation. So that was shot down. After that, Boston, San Francisco, and Philadelphia were directed to join together to design a streetcar that could fit all three of their cities. Later, the UMTA organized a BSF, or Boston and San Francisco Committee, for a standardized design, and later on in 1971, the Standard LRV design came to fruition based on the requested design from Muni mentioned earlier, and was also consulted with other potential operators that already operated PCCs, such as Boston, Philadelphia, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, New Jersey. Man, that's pretty vague. El Paso? Wait, how did El Paso still have a streetcar in the 70s? And Toronto. Finally, in 1972, the UMTA awarded $33 million for the MBTA to purchase 150 SLRVs, or standard light rail vehicles. Muni would also order 80 cars for San Fran. Then in 1973, Boeing Vertol would be awarded a contract to build the SLRVs. In 1974, the first SLRV was operated on a test track at the Boeing plant and tested at the Pueblo Testing Center. The next year, the first demonstrator models ran tests in Boston. Then the MBTA got their first SLRV cars in 1976. And as an interesting side note, the first cars had trolley poles in addition to pantographs, as the MBTA was still adjusting catenary to allow for pantographs. The SLRVs entered service on December 30th, 1976. How did they perform? Despite Boeing's claims that the SLRVs were free from problems, sound familiar? These SLRVs were plagued with problems right from the get-go. One of the biggest problems was that the SLRV was trying to fit two different systems' needs. MBTA wanted a more traditional streetcar, while the Muni wanted a car that could also operate like a subway. MBTA wanted a car that could navigate really tight turns, which resulted in Muni struggling with a car that also needed to have high and low floor platforms. Other problems included, but weren't limited to, derailments on tight turns, ironically, failures in the car's electrical and propulsion systems, overly complex plug-in doors, corrosion of car shells as both systems were near the ocean, which are major sources of salt and therefore had major corrosion issues, and it didn't help that the shells were shipped from overseas and therefore across the ocean. The brakes were a pain in the ass with the single mechanical disc, air conditioning issues, especially on the MBTA, and the acoustic flex composite resilient wheels tended to fail constantly. In fact, the SLRVs derailed so constantly in the initial days of service on the MBTA that they ultimately pulled the cars out of service on April 16, 1977, with the MBTA instituting a rebuild program. Even when that ended, the MBTA still had issues with spares necessitating cannibalization, which resulted in cars being hidden from the public at least until someone found them and reported about them. Allegedly, anyways. This resulted in the MBTA not taking up 40 cars after 135 had already been delivered. They were ordering 175 cars by this time, and wanted Boeing to take up 35 cars that had already been cannibalized. Not only that, but these cars would have often been available less than 90% of the time. Seeing all these issues going on with MBTA's SLRVs, Kenneth Campbell of the MBTA said, and I quote, "They work, but they don't work as well as they should. Practically every car is a brand new design. Everyone said the technology would work, but it hasn't." In 1978, Boeing and the MBTA signed an agreement that allowed different specifications so that the remaining cars would be delivered. This only lasted about 5 minutes as problems consisted and other issues such as with labor continued. After some more offers were floated and rejected, the MBTA hired William Schwartz to help them negotiate. Boeing argued that the issues were because of poor maintenance and operational issues, while Schwartz argued that the issues with availability had cost the MBTA up to $100 million. After several negotiations between Schwartz and Boeing, finally the two sides agreed to a settlement that stuck. Boeing Vertol would return $40 million to the MBTA for modifications, and the MBTA would be able to cancel the remaining 40 cars they had on order. MBTA, meanwhile, would be responsible for any further repairs and would be responsible for any cost redesigns. Though that hiring Schwartz thing did result in an investigation by the Massachusetts legislature. As for Muni, they received their first SLRVs in 1978. But they had to undertake more rounds of testing because of the issues that were going on with the MBTA. Though remember those 40 SLRVs that never went to the MBTA? Well, the Muni would ultimately purchase the rejected Boston cars at a steep discount and had to be modified to fit the Muni. One could have spotted the difference between the Muni cars and the MBTA cars that Muni got from seeing the wood grain finish at the operator's cab and articulated section that didn't match the Muni's colors. The MBTA would ultimately operate 144 SLRVs, while the Muni operated 131. No other operator would purchase SLRVs. Buffalo Metro Rail would operate cars that looked similar to the SLRVs, but they were built by Tokyo, not Boeing. The SLRVs would be the last rail car that Boeing would make, ending their small but interesting stint at making trains, and went back to their bread and butter, aircraft, and commercial airplanes. And I think they're doing a very good job at it. I sure hope that they weren't bought by another aircraft company that got fucked over by shareholders, with said company taking their name and those shareholders totaling their reputation by Boeing whatsoever. Hang on, let me take this call. What's that? Boeing got fucked over by shareholders from another aircraft company? Damn! And their planes look so nice. I especially like the 757. I hope Boeing can recover. As for what happened to the SLRVs, well, they ultimately replaced the PCC cars, but not long afterwards got replaced themselves. MBTA were the first to begin ridding themselves of the SLRVs. MBTA at one point tested out the Canadian light rail vehicle on the Green Line, but didn't purchase those. Instead, they turned to Japan for their rolling stock needs. MBTA ordered 100 Type 7 cars from Kinki Sharyo, partially funded with cancelled SLRV funds. Later on, the MBTA ordered 20 additional Type 7 cars from Kinki Sharyo, and they arrived in 1997. But it was the Type 8 from Breda that officially spelled doom for the MBTA SLRVs. The SLRVs were all retired from the MBTA by 2007, and ultimately almost all of them were cut up for scrap. The only one that was lucky enough to escape the torch was 3424, which is now preserved at the Seashore Trolley Museum. As for the Muni, they also replaced the SLRVs with cars from Breda beginning in 1996. By 2001, all the Muni SLRVs were retired, with two making it into preservation, 1213 and 1258, with a third, 1271, now being used as an office in a Bay Area scrapyard as recently as 2018. I'm unaware of 1271's current status. In conclusion, I think it's safe to say that in hindsight, the SLRV was trying to do too much for just two systems that clearly needed their own designs, and also the fact that most of the problems seem to have stemmed from the MBTA rather than the Muni, as the SLRV was based around Muni's requested design specs. And in hindsight, the SLRV was more of a Muni car than an MBTA car. But given all that happened with the SLRVs, it seemed like it showed other streetcar and light rail operators in North America what not to do when getting new cars. But given the failure of the SLRV, it allowed for other designs like the Canadian light rail vehicle for the TTC, which also desired to replace their PCC cars, to succeed, with them even lasting 40 years until being replaced by Alstom-built Flexity Outlooks. The SLRVs may have also allowed Siemens to build and succeed with light rail vehicles like the SD100 and 160 types, as well as the S70 and S700 types that succeeded the SD100s and 160s. I genuinely believe that other operators' success with other LRVs are because of the unsuccessfulness of the SLRV and the lessons learned. And even despite the fact that the SLRV was trying to have a car for two different systems, future LRV types that were built would sometimes be in a whole variety of cities that have light rail systems. In my opinion, the SLRV walked so types like the SD100 and SD160 could run. As operators try out new pieces of rolling stock and purchase new pieces of rolling stock, a lot of us see whatever new rolling stock as ugly or pieces of shit, mostly ugly. But the thing is, we've always had pieces of rolling stock that sucked operationally at one point or another, and sometimes that bad piece of rolling stock would lead the way for better performing pieces of rolling stock to ultimately arrive, and ultimately allow for all of us to be able to go from point A to point B by train. Thank you for watching.